It should have been AOC's worst day. Trump's $250 million lawsuit was all over the news. Her approval ratings were dropping. Progressive donors were getting nervous. Even her own staff was suggesting she settle quietly. But AOC wasn't nervous. She was calm, almost too calm, because she had something Trump didn't know about, a former Trump Organization executive named David Sterling, with documents, and a story that would make Trump's lawsuit the biggest mistake of his life. When David Sterling started talking, Trump went silent for 47 seconds straight. By the time he found his voice, his empire was already crumbling. The morning started like any other disaster. Cable news networks ran Trump's lawsuit announcement on repeat. The Chiron reading, "Trump sues AOC for $250 million" in bold red letters that seemed to pulse with threat. Political commentators dissected every angle, most concluding that the young congresswoman had finally overreached. She bit off more than she can chew, one pundit declared confidently. Going after Trump's business empire without ironclad proof? That's political suicide. AOC's approval ratings had dropped 6 points overnight. 3 major progressive donors had already called her chief of staff, expressing concern about her increasingly aggressive rhetoric. Translation: back down or lose funding. Her own communications team was in panic mode. Maybe we should consider a statement, her press secretary suggested during the 8 a.m. crisis meeting, something about focusing on policy rather than personal attacks. But AOC sat at the head of the conference table, sipping her coffee with an expression that puzzled everyone in the room. She wasn't frantic. She wasn't defensive. She was almost satisfied. What they didn't know was that Trump's lawsuit was exactly what she'd been waiting for. For 6 months, AOC had been quietly building a case. Not in public, not through press conferences or Twitter storms, but through painstaking investigation. Late nights in secure rooms, encrypted communications, and meetings with sources who demanded absolute anonymity. The breakthrough had come 3 weeks earlier, in the form of a handwritten letter slipped under her office door. No signature, no return address, just a phone number and 4 words: "I worked for him." The voice on the other end of that phone call belonged to David Sterling, a former Trump Organization senior financial analyst who had been terminated 2 years earlier for asking too many questions about property valuations. "I've been waiting for someone with the courage to listen," Sterling had told her during their first clandestine meeting in a DC coffee shop. "I have everything. Documents, emails, financial records, proof of systematic tax fraud going back 15 years. But Sterling had been silenced by a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that threatened both financial ruin and criminal prosecution if he spoke publicly. The NDA was so ironclad that even the hint of whistleblowing could destroy his life. Until now. The moment Trump filed that lawsuit, AOC's lawyer had explained, he opened the door to discovery. Sterling's testimony becomes relevant to defending against defamation claims. The NDA becomes unenforceable when it conflicts with legal proceedings. Trump, in his arrogance, had handed AOC the key to unlock everything. But AOC had no idea just how devastating Sterling's testimony would be. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning in the Hart Senate Office Building, Committee Room 2116, the same chamber where some of the most consequential oversight hearings in American history had taken place. AOC arrived early, her red folder containing 5 years of meticulous investigation. But she wasn't alone. Sitting in the witness gallery, looking nervous but determined, was David Sterling. Trump entered the chamber like a man attending his own coronation. Expensive suit, confident stride, flanked by the kind of high-powered attorneys that billionaires deploy when they want to crush opposition. He surveyed the room with the casual arrogance of someone who had never lost a fight that mattered. His eyes briefly met AOC's across the chamber. She didn't look away. Instead, she gave him the slightest nod, a gesture so subtle that only he would understand its meaning. "You walked into my trap," the committee chair called the session to order. "We're here today to address Representative Ocasio-Cortez's request to present testimony relevant to the defamation claim filed against her by Mr. Trump." Trump's lead attorney immediately objected. "This is an abuse of process. The appropriate venue for addressing defamation claims is civil court, not a congressional hearing." AOC rose to respond, and her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone holding 4 aces. "Madam Chair, when a private citizen uses litigation to silence congressional oversight, that becomes a matter of significant public interest. Mr. Trump's lawsuit specifically claims that my statements about his business practices are false and defamatory. I believe the American people deserve to see the evidence." The chair nodded. "The representative may proceed with her witness." AOC turned toward the gallery. "I call David Sterling." The reaction was immediate. Trump's attorneys huddled frantically, whispering urgent consultations. Trump himself went very still, his confident expression flickering for just a moment. He recognized the name. David Sterling walked to the witness table with the measured steps of a man who had been preparing for this moment for 2 years. He was sworn in quickly, his hands steady on the Bible, his voice clear as he promised to tell the truth. AOC began her questioning with surgical precision. Mr. Sterling, can you state your former position with the Trump Organization? Senior Financial Analyst, Property Valuation Division. I worked there for 8 years. And what were your primary responsibilities? I prepared financial statements for tax filings, loan applications, and insurance claims. I also conducted internal audits of property valuations across the Trump Organization portfolio. The room was completely silent. Even the usual background murmur of staffers and reporters had stopped. AOC pulled out her first document. Mr. Sterling, I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit A. Do you recognize this? Sterling studied the paper, and his expression darkened. Yes, this is a property valuation report for Mar-a-Lago that I prepared in 2019. Can you tell us what this document shows? Sterling's voice was steady, professional. According to this assessment, conducted for tax purposes, Mar-a-Lago was valued at $26.6 million. A murmur rippled through the chamber. That seemed low for such a famous property, but not scandalously so. AOC pulled out a second document. Mr. Sterling, I'm now showing you Exhibit B. Do you recognize this? Sterling nodded grimly. This is a loan application submitted to Deutsche Bank 3 weeks after the tax valuation, for the same property, same assessment period. And what valuation does this document show? $739 million. The chamber erupted. Reporters frantically scribbled notes. Camera operators zoomed in on Sterling's face, then swiveled to capture Trump's reaction. Trump had gone completely white. AOC let the chaos continue for exactly 10 seconds, then raised her hand for silence. When she spoke, her voice cut through the noise like a blade. Mr. Sterling, to be absolutely clear, are you testifying that the same property was valued at $26.6 million for tax purposes and $739 million for loan purposes within a 3-week period? Yes, Representative. Same property, same time frame, same underlying assets. The only difference was the intended use of the valuation. AOC turned toward the projection screen. Mr. Sterling, is this pattern dramatically different valuations for the same property depending on the purpose, something you observed across other Trump Organization properties? Sterling didn't hesitate. Yes, it was systematic. Golf courses valued at $1.4 million for taxes and $161 million for loans. Commercial buildings assessed at $16.7 million for tax purposes and $350 million for financing. This wasn't occasional discrepancy, it was standard practice. The room was dead silent except for the soft clicking of camera shutters. Trump's lead attorney was on his feet. Objection. This witness is bound by confidentiality agreements. That AOC cut him off smoothly. Madam Chair, Mr. Trump's lawsuit specifically challenges my statements about his business practices as false and defamatory. Mr. Sterling's testimony directly addresses the truthfulness of those statements. The confidentiality agreement becomes void when it conflicts with legitimate legal proceedings. The chair sustained AOC's position, but AOC wasn't finished. She had one more bombshell. Mr. Sterling, did you ever raise concerns about these valuation discrepancies with your supervisors? Sterling's jaw tightened. Multiple times. I prepared detailed memos documenting the inconsistencies and submitted them to senior management. And what was the response? I was told that property valuation was an art, not a science, and that I should focus on my assigned tasks rather than questioning established practices. AOC produced another document. Mr. Sterling, I'm showing you Exhibit C. Do you recognize this? Sterling looked at the paper, and for the first time his composure cracked slightly. This is the termination letter I received after my final attempt to report the valuation irregularities. Can you read the stated reason for your termination? Sterling's voice was barely controlled. Failure to maintain confidentiality standards and inappropriate questioning of proprietary business methodologies. AOC turned to face Trump directly. Mr. Sterling, in your professional opinion, based on 8 years of experience with Trump Organization financial practices, were my public statements about systematic property valuation irregularities accurate, completely accurate? If anything, the public statements understated the scope of the problem. The silence that followed was deafening. Trump sat frozen, his face a mask of barely controlled fury and growing panic. His legal team was frantically passing notes, their confident demeanor completely evaporated. AOC had one final question. Mr. Sterling, are you aware that making false statements on loan applications constitutes bank fraud, and that providing false information to tax authorities constitutes tax fraud? Yes, Representative. Both are federal felonies. AOC closed her folder. No further questions. Trump's attorney attempted damage control, but Sterling had been preparing for cross-examination for months. Every question was answered with documentation. Every challenge was met with additional evidence. By the time the hearing adjourned, the damage was total and irreversible. Within hours, the IRS announced a comprehensive audit of all Trump Organization tax filings for the past decade. The Manhattan District Attorney's Office opened a criminal investigation into potential bank fraud. Deutsche Bank froze all Trump Organization accounts pending review. Trump's $250 million lawsuit was quietly withdrawn the next morning,
But the real devastation was just beginning. Within a week, the New York Attorney General filed a civil fraud lawsuit seeking $300 million in penalties. The Trump Organization's credit rating was downgraded to junk status. 3 major business partners canceled contracts worth over $150 million. The empire that Trump had spent decades building began collapsing with stunning speed. David Sterling, meanwhile, became a symbol of courage for corporate whistleblowers everywhere. His testimony had done more than expose financial fraud. It had demonstrated that truth, properly documented and courageously presented, could topple even the most seemingly powerful adversaries. AOC's approval ratings didn't just recover, they soared to the highest levels of her career. The congresswoman who had been written off as overreaching had instead delivered one of the most consequential oversight hearings in recent memory. In her press conference following the hearing, AOC was characteristically direct. This was never about politics. This was about accountability. When someone uses litigation to silence oversight, they're not protecting their reputation, they're confessing their guilt. Trump never recovered from the Sterling testimony. The man who had built his political career on claims of business genius was exposed as someone whose empire was constructed on systematic fraud. The lawsuit that was supposed to silence his critics instead became the catalyst for his complete financial and political ruin. Sometimes the biggest mistakes come disguised as brilliant strategies. Trump thought he was wielding the law as a weapon. Instead, he had handed AOC the exact tool she needed to destroy him. The Sterling hearing became a case study in government schools and business ethics programs, a perfect example of how arrogance and overreach can transform a powerful position into complete vulnerability. What should have been AOC's worst day had become Trump's last day as a credible political and business figure. And it all started with his decision to file a lawsuit he was certain he couldn't lose.